The first presentation is by Munzhedzi James Mafela from South Africa, focusing on Vhavenḓa traditional leaders and proverbs. The floor is yours, Munzhedzi.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity you have given me to present this paper. Then the title of my paper is Vhavenḓa Traditional Leaders, a Perception Through the Lens of Proverbs. As already has been indicated, I am Munzhedzi James Mafela. I'm attached to the University of South Africa in South Africa. So my outline of the presentation is as follows. I will start by introducing and giving background information to the talk. Then this will be followed by the presentation of the selected proverbs. That is the proverbs which I'm going to discuss. And then follows the perception of Vhavenḓa traditional leaders, how they are perceived by the Vhavenḓa society. And then lastly, it will be the conclusion. All living organisms on earth embrace a form of leadership in their existence. Animals, for example, lead their lives under a leader, although it is not known how the leaders are bestowed with the position. Among the human beings, the bestowal of a leader differs from one nation to another. In some nations, leaders are elected, whereas in others, they are born for the position. Some nations practice both forms. At present, many nations ascribe to the election of their leaders, a form introduced by the West and considered by many people to be democratic. Many African nations have adopted this form of choosing a leader in addition to their traditional form of leadership. This means that the practice of leadership differs from one nation to the other, one racial group to the other, one ethnic group to the other, and from one tribe to another. Leadership is an important means of guiding life in a group of the living. Nations all over the world lead an organized life because of the presence of leaders. However, this does not mean that all leaders lead the people in a manner that is acceptable to all members of a particular group. Hence, some leaders are considered autocratic. Many African nations believe in the role of traditional leaders for the leadership of the people, although this runs parallel to the Western form of leadership. They do not abandon their traditional form of leadership because their social, political, religious, and economic systems are rooted in the traditional leadership, that is, chiefs, kings, and queens, even after the introduction of Western civilization. The royal house was and is still considered an important institution for leadership in a tribe or nation. However, leadership among the African nations differ from one tribe to another because it is guided by the culture and customs of a particular group. The Vhavenḓa traditional leaders practice their leadership role differently from that of other nations because their culture is different. The subjects have a certain expectation from their traditional leaders, which differs from that of other nations. Although modern Vhavenḓa recognize the authority of traditional leaders as an important part of their life, very few are aware of the perception of these leaders by ordinary subjects. The paper discusses Vhavenḓa's perception of traditional leaders through Tshivenḓa proverbs. All the proverbs selected for the discussion are gathered from Venda Dictionary, Tshivenḓa English. The concept traditional leader in this paper refers to a chief, king, and queen. Then the following are the selected proverbs for the discussion. Shangula sha tovera dimulano. There is no peace without authority. Tovera hakarai. His Majesty never gets old to acquire more wives. Zamsanda zikumba tore. To suffer injustice at the hands of the chief. Musanda batodango mahedzi. The chief does not care for the welfare of the people, but only for the profit he can make out of them. Ipila kosi ndimbado iarema. The chief gives the decision, which is final. Ngaiponde isie marambo. The chief should not be too hard when interceding for one who has incurred his wrath. Ngwena aivitibani. The chief does not leave his royal village. Ichiruma iranga ngawayo. Punishment should be meted out to one's own first. So I think you have realized that in these examples, mention is only made to a chief. But wherever chief is mentioned, then it also means the king and also the queen. Then Proverbs and the perception of traditional leaders. It is not common for Vhavenḓa to comment on the behavior and life of their traditional leaders in public because they fear and respect the royal house. The least they can do to criticize or appreciate their leaders is to render praises for them during the presence or absence during their presence or absence at royal house ceremonies, for instance. During these ceremonies, a Vhavenḓa can say anything negative or positive about a traditional leader without fear, and the traditional leader is not expected to defend himself or herself on the other hand. Vhavenḓa use proverbs, songs, and idioms to comment on the character of a traditional leader and the chieftainship. This paper focuses on the use of proverbs as a tool to highlight the perception of Vhavenḓa on their traditional leaders. The first example, Shangula sha tovera dimulano. One of the roles of a traditional leader is to maintain law and order. To show the importance of a traditional leader regarding the maintenance of law and order, Vhavenḓa used the proverb Shangula sha tovera dimulano, which Van Varmelo defines. Then the word tovera refers to the chief, king or queen. Tovera is a legendary founder of the leading groups of the most recent immigrants into Venda. That is from Van Varmelo. All traditional leaders, that is chief, king, or queen, are associated with the founder of Venda, who is called tovera. Hence, a traditional leader is respected and feared by all the inhabitants. The legendary founder fought great battles until he or she settled in a particular area. In addition, his or her subjects see him or her as a link between them and their ancestors. He or she is therefore considered a defender and peacemaker in the tribe. Through the proverb, Shangola Shaya Tover and Mulano, there is no peace without authority, but Venda view a traditional leader as a peacemaker in the tribe. In many instances, a tribe without a traditional leader is characterized by conflicts, members of the royal house fighting each other for the position of an heir, and ordinary inhabitants in the tribe disrespecting law and order. Then the second example, Tobera Hakarai. Like other African groups, Vhavenḓa are a nation that believes in simultaneous polygamy. That is, a man can have as many wives as he can simultaneously. This view gives the chief and king an opportunity to marry as many wives as they can, even if they are at an aging state. Van Warmelo defines the proverb. Then the proverb Tobera Hakarai refers to a male traditional leader. The verb stem karai does not age, is derived from the verb stem karaha, grow old. Then the proverb means that male traditional leaders remain young forever. The subjects support this practice and are proud of being under the rule of a chief or king who has many wives and children. To them, the reproductive organs of a too old chief or king do not stop reproducing. Many families would look forward to having their young girls getting married to the chief or king. They will support this desire by indicating that Tobera Hakarai, His Majesty never gets old. Although this proverb refers to the male traditional leaders, two old female traditional leaders can also marry as many wives as they can. The difference between a female traditional leader and a male traditional leader regarding getting married to many wives is that for a male traditional leader, the marriage is not, for a female traditional leader, the marriage is not linked to the reproduction of offspring, but with assistance with homestead chores. The married women are handed over to males in the household for the reproduction of offspring. Then the other example, which is Zamsanda Zikumbatore. Musanda is the homestead of a chief, king or queen, which is called the royal village. The chief, king, and queen are considered wealthy persons in the tribe as they own many wives, children, and many heads of livestock, which they use to acquire more wives. They acquire the wealth from their subjects, who give them freely because they are their leaders. Tore in the proverb above means a weak, sickly animal. Van Warmelo defines the proverb. Vhavenḓa respect their traditional leaders. At times, when a traditional leader ill-treats them, they use proverbs to protest against him or her. The literal meaning of the proverb indicates that the subject's cattle become the property of the traditional leader when mixed with his or hers. The subjects are poor when compared to the leader. The little they own is taken by the chief, king, or queen. When they complain about the ill treatment, the subjects are referred to the proverb Zamsanda Zikumbatore. The cattle from the royal village go off with the weaklings, meaning that a traditional leader takes from the poor. Vhavenḓa believe that there is no need to complain with the subject's property. When the subject's property is taken by the chief, king, and queen. The subjects suffer injustice and at the hands of traditional leaders out of their respect for the institution of chieftainship and the fact that they are poor. So with regard to discussing the example, I think this will be the last one so that I have to respect the time allocated. Then in conclusion, some proverbs clearly show that Vhavenḓa do not only respect their traditional leaders, they also fear them. Then some proverbs clearly show that Vhavenḓa do not only respect their traditional leaders, they also fear them. They cannot criticize or praise their leaders in public. This can only be done in formal gatherings, such as rites, ceremonies, and the tribal court. The only means through which the subjects can comment on the traits of their leaders is through praises, proverbs, idioms, and songs. Through proverbs, Vhavenḓa perceive their traditional leaders as defenders and peacemakers in their tribes or nation. Some proverbs reveal that the presence of traditional leaders ensures peace and stability in the communities. The word of a traditional leader is powerful. It cannot be disputed by his or her subjects. This means that a traditional leader is bestowed with absolute power. Through Proverbs, Vhavenḓa encourage polygamous marriage, especially among the traditional leaders. All traditional leaders are expected to have as many wives as they can, irrespective of a male or female traditional leader. To the Vhavenḓa, a royal village should be big in order to receive respect. Hence, a traditional leader should get married to many women to produce many children. Sometimes Vhavenḓa are not happy about their traditional leaders' actions just because they have the absolute power over their subjects. They ill-treat and exploit them with no one to reprimand them. Through the use of proverbs, the subjects protest against their traditional leaders. These leaders are further viewed as persons who do not care about the welfare of their subjects, but about wealth. As a supreme judge in the tribe, a traditional leader is expected to be fair in his or her judgment. All the subjects must be treated equally. Further, a traditional leader is a person who should not mix with many people, especially in public. He or she should be confined to the royal village. This is practiced to avoid poisoning and committing foolish mistakes that can harm his or her reputation. Then the proverbs discussed above have shown that Vhavenḓa organize their life around the central authority of their chiefs, kings, and queens. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Munzhedzi, for your very interesting presentation. Here is one question from the audience, from Oti. Hi, Oti. Can you elaborate about the possibilities to criticize those in power using a proverb?
Well, as I've already indicated, that the people in power, especially the traditional leaders, they can be criticized by their subjects, but this is not done in public. The places where it can be done, that is when they are holding the rites ceremonies, that is right ceremonies, or maybe even at the tribal court, or when people are gathered in the what you call in the royal village, then they can criticize the leaders. But then when they criticize them, then the leaders are not expected maybe to respond or argue with those who are criticizing them. They must take the criticism as it is.
Thank you. I have a question myself. How can you compare these proverbs about leadership between Vhavenḓa and other nations? And do they apply only to the king, or they can also apply to other official authorities?
Well, I can say that there could be some differences with proverbs in other nations. But with regard to the African nations, then you find that proverbs are found to be almost the same. Then when it comes to what was your second, what you call the second question?
The second was if whether they apply only to the king or to other authorities, other officials.
Yeah, they, especially the proverbs in Tshivenḓa and mostly in other African nations, they usually apply to the traditional leaders, such as the king, the chief, and also the queen. But when it comes to that is let's say the modern leaders, then you find that modern leaders can be criticized anywhere. They can be criticized in public. They can be criticized in the newspapers. Anywhere they can be they can be criticized.
Thank you very much again, Munzhedzi.